Good evening. I'm Victoria Johnson. Welcome to the celebration for my grandfather, Leroy Johnson. Husband, father, grandfather, lawyer, politician, and community leader. You may know him as Senator Leroy Johnson, but at home we call him Papa. Leroy Johnson is practicing law, and among his celebrated clients are James Brown, Otis Redding, Johnny Taylor, Tom Paine, former Atlanta Hawk, and Joel Williams, former Atlanta Falcon. We want you to relax in an atmosphere of love and friendship and witness some of Leroy Johnson's moments in history.
In April 1962, a federal district court struck down Georgia's county unit system. The General Assembly had devised the system in 1917 as a means to keep political power from shifting from rural Georgia to the growing urban areas. According to the Supreme Court in 1963, the system violated the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. This ruling established the famous one-person, one-vote rule, stating no matter where you live, rural or urban, one person's vote cannot count more than another person. The Supreme Court issued the one-person, one-vote ruling. A young black lawyer from Fulton County decided to run for the Georgia Senate. In 1962, Leroy Johnson became the first African-American to enter the Georgia legislature since 1906.
When I went into the Senate in '62, none of the senators would speak to me. There were those who actually thought, because I was elected, that the seats would crumble and that the ceiling would fall in. I had to develop a philosophy that suggested that you have friendship toward all, but entangling alliances with none.
The 100th anniversary of the state capitol is a time to remember how far we've come. The civil rights movement produced angry speeches in the Capitol, but dramatic developments as well. The General Assembly accepted public school integration in 1961. And in 1963, Leroy Johnson became the first black in the legislature since 1907. This is Secretary of State Max Cleland. Integration was a tense and difficult process, but at 100 years old, the state capitol today represents all Georgians.
The return of the champion. This is the Municipal Auditorium in Atlanta, Georgia. Tonight, live via closed-circuit television to almost 1 million viewers in theaters and arenas throughout the United States and Canada, and millions more in Mexico, Puerto Rico, Australia, the Soviet Union, and the Far East. In this boxing ring, you'll see the return of the champion in a 15-round heavyweight contest. Muhammad Ali, called by many the fastest man to ever wear the heavyweight crown, against Jerry Quarry, the sharp-hooking #1 ranked challenger from Bellflower, California. Tonight's closed-circuit telecast is presented by Sports Action Incorporated. The promoter is House of Sports Incorporated. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Tom Harmon, ringside here from Atlanta, Georgia, where tonight there are 5,000 fans packed into this arena, anticipating a great fight, and primarily to see the return of a great heavyweight champion, Muhammad Ali, or as, of course, most all of you know him, Cassius Clay. Here he comes, the first time, again stepping in as a heavyweight in an important fight since his last title defense 3.5 years ago. Muhammad Ali coming up with his handlers here, wearing a white robe. And I don't believe that anybody in this entire group is happier than this young man to once again have the opportunity to step into the ring. Boxing is his trade. Boxing is his fame.
Ladies and gentlemen, here is the man responsible for bringing the fight to Atlanta, Georgia, Senator Leroy Johnson.
Let me introduce to you the mayor of this great city, Sam Massell. Mr. Robert Castle, Sports Action Inc., New York City. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure at this time, on behalf of the fighters, on behalf of the House of Sports, Mr. Harry Petts, Jesse Hill Jr., and myself, and on behalf of Robert Castle of Sports Action Inc. of New York, we present to the city of Atlanta, to the mayor of this great city, $50,000 for the mayor's drug abuse program to stop the traffic of drugs in our city.
Thank you, Senator Johnson, and let me take a moment to welcome our audience around the world to this, which is much more than a sporting event. It's a demonstration in democracy, and to express appreciation to your generosity and to that of the fighters for supporting our cause and stemming the flow of drugs in Atlanta with this check for $50,000. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. From Louisville, Kentucky, he's wearing white trunks. He weighs 213 and a half. Return of the champion, Muhammad Ali. Main event, 15 rounds. Tony?
Mohammed Jerry Quarry. I'm here to enforce the rules of the commission. Now, you score a knockdown. You must go to the farthest neutral corner and stay there until I tell you to come out. All right? 3 knockdowns is out. Now, listen. The farthest, please stay out.
3 knockdowns.
3 knockdowns is out.
3 knockdowns is
It's
win.
voided. All right? Any questions? Shake hands and good luck to both of you.
To go. Clay in the white trunks, Quarry in the blue. 15 rounds. Got his bleeding profusely. And once again, left and right combination by Clay. Quarry is fighting back, but the cut has been opened. See the timer, 15 seconds. And there's the bell to end round 3. Jerry Quarry going back to the corner. While his trainer, Teddy Bentham, Lou Gross, and Willie Ketchum go to work on that cut. Referee Tony Perez standing directly above Corey's corner, watching him. And Perez is calling for the doctor. Corey is upset about it. Bentham trying to hold him back. Referee Tony Perez has signaled the fight is over, apparently because of an eye cut.
It's a terrible cut, Tom. You and I both can see it.
There's no doubt about it being a very bad cut.
I'm glad that I am back so we can settle this confusion about Joe Frazier and all the people who think he's still the champion. And I hope something can soon be worked out where we can solve this whole heavyweight match.
Good evening. Let me invite you, welcome you to this great and historical occasion. It is my honor and privilege to serve as your presiding officer on this day of history. Now we will hear from former Governor of Georgia, the Honorable Carl Sanders, known as the Education Governor.
One of the reasons that I'm so happy to come is because I happen to have been the governor of the state when Senator Johnson was first elected. 1962. Some of you, I might, as I look out in this audience, many of you probably were too young to think about what was happening in that day and time. Those were troubled times. We were in the midst of the civil rights battle. And there were definitely more political hotheads than there were cool heads at that time. As governor, I did not know what to expect of Senator Johnson, the first Afro-American elected to the Georgia Senate in almost 100 years. I knew him from his reputation as a lawyer, that he was an able advocate, but I did not know whether his intentions as a politician was to disrupt and grandstand before his constituency or to act responsibly. I soon learned, however, that Senator Johnson's modus operandi was to use his intellect and approach matters in a cool, calm, and deliberate manner. He informed me early on that he stood for progress with a big P, racial progress, educational progress, industrial progress, and that as long as I produced programs that meant progress for all citizens, that I could count on his support. I don't know of any member of the General Assembly of Georgia at that time who made a greater contribution to the forward progress of our state than Leroy Johnson. He was a great friend and leader then, and he still is today. One cardinal principle of politics above all else is integrity. And in Leroy's case, his word was his bond. And you didn't have to worry that what he told you yesterday might not be the same thing today. And I feel today that it's truly an honor and a privilege for me to come and to pay tribute to him. He deserves this very singular honor, and as his friend and former colleague, I'm proud for him and his family and his friends on this historic occasion. Thank you very much.
Henry Law School in 1967, there was not a majority firm in town, including the state attorney general, that would interview black lawyers so that we could have clerkship and go to work. But Leroy Johnson said, my doors are open and you will have a place to do your work, do your clerkship, and I will teach you and train you how to be a good lawyer. So that is a perspective that you do not know about, the contributions that he made over at 1014 Gordon Street. And that's how Clarence Cooper and I got a chance to practice our trade. So on behalf of Afro-American lawyers in this particular state, and now I think about it, them are now majority firms raid minority firms, all right? But I can produce them. I just hired 2 Arrington this morning, Marvin and Gio, okay? But Leroy, thank you, thank you, thank you. And you need to sit down, as I've said the last 2 or 3 years, and write you a book and recapture all of the rich contributions that you have made to this city, to this state, and to this country.
Yes.
When they were running for president, I was a young clerk, I was scared to death. A white man walked in and said his name was Edmund Muskie. I said, United States something? Yes, I'm running for president. Somebody told me if I wanted to be president, I needed to talk to Leroy Johnson. That's a true story. Hubert Humphrey came through that particular building. I saw all the big names and all the big leaders come through 1014 Gordon Street. So you need to stop, take time out, and write that book. All the best.
I cannot go any further without saying that not only was he and not only is he a great man, but he also is a very intelligent individual. You can always tell how smart a man is by looking at his wife. And Senator Johnson is brilliant. I would please ask you to stand so that we could acknowledge the lovely Dr. Johnson.
Senator Johnson and then President Lyndon Johnson on the occasion of a visit to the White House by Senator Johnson. This picture was made in the Rose Garden for a summit of black leaders. Senator and Mrs. Johnson visit the White House for a reception given by President and Mrs. Kennedy. Seated on the front row are Ethel Kennedy, Vice President Lyndon Johnson, Lady Bird Johnson, President Kennedy, and Jacqueline Kennedy. They are surrounded by prominent black leaders such as Whitney Young and his wife Margaret, John H. Johnson, publisher of Ebony and Jet, James Farmer, president of SNCC, Roy Wilkins, and Senator and Mrs. Johnson. Senator Johnson and President Carter shaking hands in the Georgia Senate. Some years before this occasion, Senator Johnson and President Carter had served in the Georgia Senate together. March 1963 issue of Ebony magazine published an article entitled Georgia's Negro Senator. Young Atlanta legislator is the first Negro elected to the Georgia Senate since Reconstruction. The November 8, 1970 New York Times Magazine carried an article entitled Leroy Johnson Outslicks Mr. Charlie. This article appeared after Senator Johnson obtained a boxing permit for Muhammad Ali to return to the boxing ring after 67 cities had denied granting Ali a license. October 26, 1970 marked an historic occasion, the day Ali was able to fight again. It was held in the Old City Auditorium in Atlanta, Georgia. Senator Johnson again proved his ability to accomplish what some considered to be an impossible task, returning Ali to the boxing world.
Georgia on my mind. Georgia on my mind.
The June 1972 issue of Atlanta Magazine carried Senator Johnson on the cover and included an article on Senator Johnson's political accomplishments and service to his community.
I'm Bill Hoffman, Vice President and General Manager for WSB-TV Channel 2. America stands on the brink of a defining moment, and tonight we'll take you on an extraordinary journey of events that led to Barack Obama's historic inauguration in Washington tomorrow. Atlanta has played a significant role, and this special provides a unique perspective from those who helped make it possible. I hope you find this program both informative and revealing.
Good evening, I'm John Pruitt, reporting for the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change. Tomorrow's historic inauguration of President-elect Barack Obama marks the culmination of a series of events that all paved the way. And leaders from Atlanta and across the state of Georgia played a major part. Well, tonight there are many stories stretching from Atlanta all the way to Washington. In the 1950s, African Americans in Georgia had virtually no voting power. They were discriminated against, often prevented from voting at all. But over the next 2 decades, that began to change, not without struggle. It's an often overlooked part of the story of the journey to the White House, and it shows how far we have come. In the early 1960s, voting in Georgia was not a given for African Americans. Less than a third of blacks registered to vote. Sometimes the vote was cast in a booth, but other times in literally a garbage can. But the odds of having a ballot counted were still greater than the odds of a black man holding office. That is, until a Morehouse graduate who earned his law degree strolled into the state capitol.
When I went into the Senate, not one senator would speak to me during the first session. I would walk down the corridors of the Capitol, past senators and say, "Good morning, Senator," and they would say, "Good morning, Senator,
Johnson made history when he won a state Senate seat in 1962. He was the first African American elected to the Capitol since Reconstruction, making headlines for Georgia in magazines from Esquire to Ebony. You face so many indignities on the part of your colleagues in the Senate. At what point did those indignities begin to stop?
Probably my third year. The first year, almost nobody spoke to me until the end. The second year, it was better, but the third year, they began to accept me as a person. I then thought that I had to learn the rules better than they. So when I took the floor of the Senate, I spoke with authority.
Respect began to develop.
Respect began to develop.
From the WSB-TV archives, one can see Johnson giving a tour of the Capitol to young African Americans. He recruited the first black pages, and he quietly began to challenge the rules. Signs seen all over the South that earmarked colored and white facilities were also at the Capitol. So Johnson ventured into the forbidden zones.
One of the guards came up and says, "Wait a minute, you can't do that. You can't go into this restroom," talking about the restroom that had the sign white on the door. "You have to go in the one that said colored." I said, "No, I'm a state senator, and we're going into this when I carried my pages into that restroom."
Johnson believes that guard reported him to then-Governor Carl Sanders, a governor who became an unlikely ally and later a best friend.
And I said, "Ben, we can't continue to have these kind of signs in the Georgia Capitol. I want you to take them down tonight and remove every one of them out of there." The next morning, there wasn't another sign in there. Senator Johnson came by and smiled and said, "I see there are no signs in the Capitol." I said, "No, they're not any. They're not going to be any." He just smiled and went on.
And this desegregation of the Capitol happened without any press conference, without really a ripple of publicity.
If I had gone out on the streets and had a press conference and advised that I was going to do that, we'd have had a riot.
Governor Carl Sanders supported the administration of another young politician, President John F. Kennedy, and so did Leroy Johnson. They also both respected the law. New laws came in the form of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, signed by President Lyndon Johnson, and the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Registration of black voters soared. 11 African Americans to Georgia's General Assembly, including the controversial Julian Bond. The 70s ushered in Atlanta's first black mayor, Maynard Jackson, a mayor who served 3 terms. These political pioneers paved the way for those who followed. A painting hangs near the Georgia Senate chambers, honoring Leroy Johnson. But even he never imagined an African American president in his lifetime.
He breathed the air of freedom.
the air that all of us have wanted to breathe for all of our lives.
Leroy Johnson is in Washington tonight. He's brought his wife and his granddaughters to witness tomorrow's inauguration.